Alright, I have been on the iPhone 15 Pro Max quite a bit over the last number of weeks, and in that time there have been some significant developments in the experience with Apple's Pro Max smartphone. So why don't we go ahead and get right into it, because it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Here's what worked and what didn't with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. When Apple sent me the iPhone 15 Pro Max and not the smaller Pro model, I was a little bit miffed, because normally I don't go for the biggest model. Smaller hands or not, I just like having an easier time using my everyday tech. I'm personally okay sacrificing a bit of the screen size and the battery size if it means that my pockets aren't screaming for breathing room and my hands can do a bit fewer gymnastics. But while the dimensions of the iPhone 15 Pro Max are still large and in charge, I do have to give Apple a ton of credit for making it feel super light. That's because of one key aspect, and that is the material change. Say what you will about the build quality after a couple of videos came out on YouTube, titanium is the material that is going to make up the Pro models this year, and the result is an overall lighter phone. Here's one way to put it. If last year you went for the iPhone 14 Plus and were surprised at how nimble and light that phone was, well, that's exactly the same type of feeling that I got with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. It's a little bit astonishing. From a design standpoint, everything else is about the same otherwise. There's a subtle slope on all of the sides over here on the railing so that it feels a little bit softer to grip. The backing is also matted now, which I personally love, especially in this natural titanium color. I mean, if they're going to make a big deal about going to titanium materials, I'm going to go all in. I mean, heather gray is one of my favorite colors, so put it on the phone as well. Speaking of going all in, this is the model of the iPhone that brings every single high-powered spec to the table. And that does start with having the biggest screen in the lineup. The 6.7-inch Super Retina display has just a bit less bezel all around compared to before, which is pretty great. It just feels pretty awesome when holding the phone naked, even if the dynamic island up top cuts into the very top portion. Now, being a Pro model screen, this is also the display that gets the always-on capabilities, and this is honestly one of my favorite features. See, customizing it with a couple of widgets via the lock screen settings is possible, but I'm all about finding just a good wallpaper, like this, and just letting it show. This is one of the features that I actually missed when using the smaller iPhone 15, as you might have seen from my video on that base model. The big hardware feature that got introduced this year is a new button. Yes, an extra button. By removing the silence toggle that we've all come to know for so long, now there's an action button that at first just did one thing: silence the phone. It seems like a cop-out at first until they talked about being able to change that function. And then it felt like yet another cop-out when it became clear you can only pick one of the listed functions in that page in the settings. And then people used the shortcuts in order to give this more capabilities. And now my head is kind of spinning, and it's all because of just one button. Alright, don't get me wrong, it is great to see more tactility come to an iPhone for once, but it really feels like Apple is just doing the usual thing of introducing the bare minimum of a feature that users want, if only to expand on it in a common sense way later so that it feels like a huge deal. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere down the line, maybe next year or the year after that, Apple will act like a double press or a triple press or even just a single press of this one button is revolutionary. But until then, the action button stands as another point of separation between the base and the Pro models this year, and even then, it clearly isn't living up to its full potential. The lines drawn between base and Pro, though, is no more evident than in the processor, the A17 Pro. The Pro models this year straight up dropped the Bionic name, and after just some time after its release, the iPhone 15 Pro Max is doing all that it can to live up to the new name. At the end of October, a look at what that Pro feature might look like finally arrived as Resident Evil Village appeared in the App Store. That's right, AAA titles are coming to the App Store, bringing games that you once dreamed of playing on a smartphone to the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. Now, I'm a scaredy cat when it comes to horror games, but I'm actually going to give this and the Resident Evil 4 remake, which is apparently going to come out by the end of this year, I'm going to give them a real try simply because I can. Now, to be fair, it's all still in its infancy, and in order to even achieve that level of gaming, you have to go for the most powerful and the most expensive of the Apple ecosystem. But like with all advancements in tech, a good starting point now means we're just going to improve moving forward, so I'm going to grab my controller and ride the wave. Before I get too ahead of myself, I have to reiterate that there are just a handful of AAA games that are currently coming over to the Apple side. In the meantime, virtually every other game is still best experienced on a good gaming laptop, and that's where the sponsor of this video comes in. The Asus ROG Strix G16 is a properly spec'd, reasonably priced gaming laptop that will power all of the games that you want to play on the go. Available at Newegg, the ROG Strix G16 sports an RTX 4050 blasting all of the games to a 16:10 display capable of 165Hz refresh rate. And despite the size of the display, the laptop retains the same footprint of a 15-inch laptop. Long gaming sessions are helped by the cooling system with Thermal Grizzly's Conductonaut Extreme Liquid Metal on the CPU and a third intake fan to keep everything running smoothly for longer. Check out the ROG Strix G16 now from Newegg and get a 90-day trial for Xbox Game Pass Ultimate to access over 100 high-quality games in their extensive library. Power up your play with the Asus ROG Strix G16 via the links in the description below, and thanks to Asus and Newegg for sponsoring this video. I already said these next couple of points with the iPhone 15, but it bears repeating because the USB-C port finally coming to the iPhones is kind of a game changer. I think no matter who you are, this is all a benefit, because think of the different places where finding a cable gets easier. Maybe you already have a bunch of USB-C cables and chargers because almost everything else uses it, including your MacBook. When your iPhone 15 or 15 Pro Max is low on power, you can actually ask any of your friends who might also use Android phones for a top-up because they all have USB-C cables. And look at that, an olive cable is extending between the two sides. And in the case of the iPhone 15 Pro Max, the USB-C port now sports a lot of extra features that used to require an adapter or a dock to achieve. That last part is huge for people who might be using the iPhone 15 Pro Max as a camera rig, like Apple did for their most recent keynote, because the data rate actually makes it so that you can record ProRes video straight to an external SSD. When it made headlines that the Lightning port was going away, most people were looking forward to it simply from a usability standpoint, and now we're all benefiting. But I do have to give Apple some extra credit because they took the change and now are running with it to a pretty great effect. Unfortunately, not everyone or everything was able to meet the change with quite as much gusto. Moving over to USB-C meant that there was an easier time charging the phone without needing a proprietary cable, but there's still a layer of software within iOS that makes it so that not every USB-C accessory will just suddenly work with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I kind of get it since software and hardware handshakes are a thing. Even the Backbone 1 needed to update via an Android phone before it could even be used on the iPhone. But still, it would be nice if the U in USB-C here actually meant universal. And it's up to Apple to actually follow through with the rest of their products. Sure, you have to move to USB-C with the new iPhones, which could mean buying new cables, and that's more money out of your pocket. But what about the cables for the Lightning ports on your AirPods Pro or the AirPods Max or the Magic Mouse or the Magic Keyboard that were shown off with the recent releases of the iMacs? Apple is still in kind of a half measure when it comes to the whole USB-C development, which means if you're still using older stuff, Lightning is still in your life, and in order to come over to all USB-C everything, more money will eventually come out of your pocket. What really makes this phone Pro Max, however, has to be the cameras. A lot of what you know about iPhone cameras remains here, and for most people who might be coming from the last 2 or 3 years of these phones, the story is largely the same. Pictures get their iterative updates and better quality and better processing, and videos continue to improve and remain one of the most reliable in that realm. Seriously, speaking as a video content creator, it's hard not to gravitate to the iPhones for video that almost looks like it came from a larger camera. So what got updated this time around is how that video is captured and how far those images can go. As for how far it can go, I'm talking about the updated telephoto that is only found on the Pro Max. 5x optical zoom in that lens means that the main sensor, which is a 48 megapixel shooter, has to digitally cover the ranges from 1 to 4.9, and it does a pretty good job with diminishing returns as you get closer to 5, obviously. But then the 5x is good, but doesn't outperform most of the far zooms that we have on, let's say, certain Android phones. It's great as a photo lens due to the processing that goes into the photos, but I find that in video, the main sensor is really what you want to use the most for the best possible quality. And it's through that main lens that you can get the most out of the Pro Max thanks to features like cinematic video and ProRes capture and even log format. Now, let me level with you. I'm not usually the type to shoot with ProRes or even log footage. Like, I tend to just dial everything in camera, so I don't have to do a whole lot else in post. But with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, I'm willing to try. And I think that's a pretty big deal because the act of shooting log properly and then color grading that footage in post always seems so daunting and time consuming on a bigger camera. But now all of that is available with the camera that is usually in my pocket anyway. The accessibility of such pro features in the smartphone makes dabbling in the pro life a little bit easier. That's why you're seeing a lot of videos on YouTube right now talking about how the iPhone 15 Pro Max is now the easiest one to recommend for the first camera for creators. I mean, we've been saying that about the iPhones for some years now, and certainly any smartphone will be a great starting point for people, but with some elbow grease and maybe a replacement camera app from the App Store, the iPhone 15 Pro Max kind of has everything you need. And even then, perhaps with enough help from accessories to make up for the shortcomings a small camera system like this might have, it feels like you can get really far with just this. Accessories. The garnish on top of an already delectable meal in the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I've always wanted to put in an iPhone video my thought of just how crazy it is that so many accessory makers support the Apple ecosystem in particular, because that's a big boon to the Apple side. From cases to camera attachments to the now USB-C accessories that plug right into the port they've been supporting already, the possibilities feel even more endless than before. Here's a great example tying this point in with previous camera talk. This case from Freewell that still has a MagSafe magnet in it can then have their lenses attached to it, making the main shooter an anamorphic lens for even more stylized pro video. Or you could just use the built-in lenses and pop on an ND filter to better control the exposure. Then this grip goes right onto the side to complete the set. This is just one example, but there are so many companies out there providing their own takes on accessories just like that can complete or even transform the iPhones to support what is already quite the robust package. I just wish that level of personalization was afforded to the software side too. I talked about the lock screen settings and the always-on display wallpapers earlier, but that's about the extent of how I can make the iPhone really look the way that I want it to. Sure, there are widgets and plenty of different controls that you can put on the side screen or on the lock screen, but it's all still heavily curated to look just how Apple intends it. That's been the case for a long time, so I won't really belabor this point, but coming from a strong Android background, higher levels of customization is still something I miss from time to time, and you might too. Or maybe consider this. With the push for better gaming on the iPhones, it's still a shame that emulation is virtually non-existent on this platform. Yes, it is possible, but it's far less abundant and far less accessible. Ultimately, the iPhone 15 Pro Max continues what we expect from Apple. For most people, this is iterative. A simple update to most of the core features that make iPhones desirable to many already. The same shape, the same general take on daily smartphone experiences, and the same expected quality from display to performance to camera. But it's the familiar visage that hides the biggest steps forward. The A17 Pro, the Action button, and Super Pro video capture. All set the stage for what might be significant leaps forward in their respective parts of the smartphone experience. And if nothing else, that's what makes this quite an exciting year to be, or to want to be, a pro. Whew, these what worked and what didn't videos always tend to be way longer than I expect, but I'm glad that you made it this far and that some of you, judging by my comments, do enjoy this format. I'm still going to do more with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, including a real-world camera test where I follow up on what I said earlier. I am going to actually try shooting in ProRes and with log video capture and see if that converts me into that type of creator, even just beyond the iPhone 15 Pro Max here. And I'm going to try to actually make this a secondary camera or maybe even a replacement camera when I'm on the go, maybe with the help of some of the accessories like I said earlier with the Freewell attachments. One last shout out to Asus and Newegg for sponsoring this video. Gaming might be getting serious on the iPhone 15 Pro Max and moving forward, but if you truly want a game, a PC like the ROG Strix G16 is still the way to go. But from there, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me again today. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and enjoy your tea, everybody.